Mr. Chairman, he does not mind us going over what is in conference, and then if we would select another time to come back and start negotiating, he's fine with that.
Okay. I might ask, Representative Pishney, would you get the door or somebody just to help with a little bit of the noise outside? Thank you. Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome. Here we are again, Conference Committee Week. We're all starting with smiles. I hope we end with smiles too. This is going to be our preliminary meeting, and Madam Chair, I guess unless there's anything you wanted to go over at first, I might turn it over to research to go over the bills that we have in conference. There's been several handouts that have been made available. So unless, Madam Chair, if there's any comments you'd like to make, I'd go ahead and turn it over to Eddie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and everybody in the room should have two sheets that I provided. One of them, the one that is portrait-oriented, is kind of a list of the bills and bill provisions. The one that is landscape-oriented is just the fiscal information associated with those. And so I'll just go over the portrait one unless there are specific questions as it relates to the landscape-oriented sheet. When I prepared this, there were two bills in conference, three bills that were pending motions to concur, non-concur. I think two of those have had the non-concur without the accede, and then there's one other bill that I'll circle back around to at the very end of this that might be in this conference and might ultimately be in a different conference. So, and then the pink rows are rows that are conferenceable provisions from the two chambers related to the tax committees, but are not, the bills themselves are not in conference or pending motions to concur. And so to start, the two bills that are all the way into conference at this point are HB 2231. Both chambers have updates to the personal exemption provisions. There are kind of two key updates there. One provides for the head of household provision to kind of be treated the way it has been treated by the Department of Revenue for the past 20-some years, and then also updates the disabled veterans personal exemption amount to equal the dependent personal exemption amount that was provided for in last year's special session SB 1. The Senate added additional provisions to that bill related to some changes to the homestead refund tax freeze program. I believe there were kind of three key changes. It includes an increase to the income threshold to $80,000 in tax year 2025. It includes an increase to the maximum appraised value threshold from $350,000 to $450,000, and it provides for future increases to that valuation threshold going forward based upon the average increase of existing residential real estate over the last 10 years. It does specify that for purposes of those changes, the increased valuation limitation, the base year for calculating them would be 2024, or the first year in which the taxpayer is eligible for the program. Otherwise, for people who are currently eligible, it's 2021, or the first year in which the taxpayer is eligible for the program. HB 2275, both chambers had Finney County Sales Tax Authority in that, I believe, for the purposes of constructing a new jail or law enforcement center. The Senate added to that Pawnee County Sales Tax Authority, which was the provision of HB 2125 as passed by the House. That is for a mix of health and public safety expenditures. SB 35, when I prepared this document this morning, it was still pending a motion to non-concur. The Senate has now made that motion. The House, I imagine, will have a motion to accede to that request at their next session. It had two different sets of provisions from the two different chambers. On the Senate side, it eliminated the state's mill levies, the 1 mill levy for the educational building fund and the half mill levy for the state institutions building fund. It then created demand transfers from the state general fund to kind of backfill those levies. It wasn't dollar for dollar, it was a specified amount and then a specified increase rate going forward for those transfers. On the House side, it included provisions providing for protest petitions for certain municipal budget adoptions that exceed a statutorily defined rate of growth. It included notifications, costs to be reimbursed. It included required notifications for the availability of those protest petitions and the notification costs to be reimbursed. It included a provision requiring a roll call vote based for governing bodies of taxing entities that are exceeding that amount, and it specified that untimely filed budgets are limited to that amount. It also included the creation of the Astra Fund, the transfers from the State General Fund to the Astra Fund, and the payments of Astra Fund monies to local taxing entities. It included the repeal of the revenue neutral rate provisions, and it included the reauthorization of the statewide school finance mill levy at 20 mills. SB 269 contained provisions related to Board of Tax Appeals fees when in cases where an appeal from a preceding year is still pending before the board. The two versions were substantially similar. The House included an amendment clarifying that that pending appeal had to be on the same piece of property in order for this exclusion to apply. Senate sub for House Bill 2021. On the House side, as I mentioned previously, it provided for Pawnee County sales tax. On the Senate side, it included, it was a substitute bill, included different provisions. The first of those is that it adjusted the budget deadline for all municipal budgets to October 1st. Currently, it's August 25th if they do not exceed the revenue neutral rate, and October 1st if they do. It provided that untimely filed budgets will be applied at the prior year budgeted amount. It provided for tax statements to be mailed on or before December 1st. Current law, I believe, is December 15th. It provided for a 2-year extension of revenue neutral rate cost reimbursement, and it did include revisions to the revenue neutral rate form. So that's all of the bills that were either pending, that both chambers had positions on, is in essence what I would say. This might be a good time to pause for questions, and if not, I can jump into the conferenceable bills list. Okay. The next item is, and I'll go through first the Senate conferenceable bills and second the House conferenceable bills. There's one where the two chambers each have a conferenceable bill on a substantially similar topic. The bills are not identical, but that'll kind of provide the transition point. SB 10, as it passed the Senate, included personal property exemptions for miscellaneous personal properties, and there are kind of a lot of the not elsewhere classified subclass of those properties. Substitute for Senate Bill 33 provided that the custom meat processing sales tax exemption that was enacted last year would not require a sales tax exemption form. SB 39 provided the Kansas Legal Tender Act and an income tax subtraction modification for the sale of specie as it relates to that act. SB 69 included an extension of the Rural Opportunity Zone program, a provision allowing for the inclusion of participants in that program for residents of Kansas in non-rural areas moving to rural areas, and also expansion of options under the program. Currently, there is a student loan repayment option, and this would add alternatives of home down payment assistance, I believe it is, and also child care assistance. The next two items are where the chambers each have a bill. Senate Bill 259 and HB 2318, both are income and privilege tax rate reduction formula bills. The Senate version in SB 259 has the calculation based upon the growth of all SGF tax receipts relative to the inflation-adjusted base year SGF tax receipts. The House version has it as the growth of SGF income and privilege tax receipts related to the base year inflation-adjusted SGF income and privilege tax receipts. And the House also added a provision that the budget stabilization fund balance equal or exceed, I believe, 20 years of the previous year's SGF tax receipt amount in order for a rate reduction to go into effect. HB 2004 provided for sales tax authority for Seward County, I believe for road and bridge purposes. HB 2083 provided for a property tax exemption for energy storage systems. HB 2096 provided for transferability of housing tax credit, housing investor tax credit in the year in which the credit was issued. HB 2336 provided for single factor apportionment of corporate income for multi-state corporations. HB 2377 provided a change to a portion of the formula for countywide sales tax apportionment. HB 2390 provided for sales tax authority for Jackson County, I believe, for hospital purposes. HB 2396 is substantially similar to the House Committee of the Whole version of SB 35. I'm not anticipating going into the details of that unless either committee wants me to go into the differences between the two House versions on substantially similar topics. And then the only other thing that I'm going to mention is SB 227. That is a bill that went through the Commerce Committee on the Senate side, and it went through the House, the Tax Committee on the House side. At the time I prepared this, it was pending a motion to non-concur, and I wasn't sure whether or not to include it in this since it didn't go through these two committees specifically. Since that time, it has had a motion to non-concur. House conferees, the House is not yet acceded to that request. It does have Senate tax conferees appointed to it. That is a bill that updates the credit percentages for certain different iterations of the historic structures tax credit. And the House amended the bill as it relates to the Senate bill to also provide a provision that in the cases where the taxpayer earning the credit has delinquent taxes, the tax credit amount would first be applied to those, and then the credit amount would be those delinquencies, and then the credit amount would be reduced according to that. And so that's kind of the piece of SB 227. If this conference committee is going to take that bill up, then I'll update the document for future meetings of this to incorporate that as well. And with that, I would stand for whatever questions the conference committee might have for me.
Thank you, Eddie. Madam Chair, Eddie, I wanted to, if you briefly just discuss House Bill 2096. There's House Bill 2119, which we've had several housing tax credit bills. I wanted to reiterate that this is not that one. Would you mind going into a little bit of detail on 2096 and exactly what that bill is?
Sure, and I'll go into a little bit of legislative history as it relates to those two tax credits and hopefully clarify the distinction there a little bit. The 2022 legislature in HB 2237 enacted two different housing tax credits in the same piece of legislation. One of those was the housing investor tax credit, and one of those is the low-income housing tax credit. HB 2096 only applies to the housing investor tax credit. It does not have anything to do with the low-income housing tax credit. HB 2119 only has to do with the low-income housing tax credit. It does not have anything to do with the housing investor tax credit. The housing investor tax credit, it is a transferable tax credit, and what this does is it provides for the transferability of that tax credit to occur in the same year in which the tax credit is earned. I believe the tax credit can be carried forward up to 5 years, and so in essence, under current law, if the credit is used by the taxpayer who earned it, it's good for all 5 years. If it's transferred, the way it's read, it's in essence only years 2 through 5 in which the credit can be applied to tax liability. And so this would clarify that in cases in which it is a transferred tax credit, it can be still applied for tax years kind of 1 through 5 of that 5-year carry forward period. HB 2119, as I mentioned, relates to low-income housing tax credit. I believe the House version of that bill kind of ends that tax credit program after the current year's qualified allocation plan. I do not actually know. I know the Senate committee version of it. I don't know if that was a bill that the Senate actually took a full position on in terms of it limits that program to kind of one of the two iterations of the low-income housing tax credit, and also I believe maybe has some additional limits as well.
And Madam Chair, I didn't know if either of those two bills went through Commerce in the Senate or Senate Tax.
So, Mr. Chairman, it was kind of interesting this year. The low-income housing tax credit, we had seen that in a Senate bill in Tax Committee, and the Commerce Committee had the bill that the House sent. So it was a Senate bill that we had it in. and we did not move on that legislation this year. And so far, the House or the Senate has not moved on the commerce, the House bill that you sent us. So, but the other one, the housing transferability, that bill was introduced in the Senate Tax Committee. We did not move on that legislation for a couple of reasons. But one is you're applying for a tax credit and then you're turning around and selling it the first year. Did you really need the tax credit? So we have not seen that legislation, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious because it seems like this year we've had a few of those that seem to be bouncing between commerce and tax in both chambers, so got to keep up with the ping pong, I guess. Representative Sawyer.
While you're talking about that ping pong, there were a couple other bills I don't see listed on here that I know passed out of House Tax Committee but didn't run on the floor. Senate Bill 51 and Senate Bill 52. And there may be others, but those two come to mind. I'm just curious.
I believe both of those bills were commerce bills on the Senate side, the Commerce Committee bills, and so this was just for bills. My inclusion threshold in here was it addressed by was the conferenceability of the provision conferenceable by virtue of one of the committees in this conference committee. So,
All right, thank you.
but both of the provisions of both of those bills are of course conferenceable generally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hey, Eddie, just because I know it happened on the House floor last week, can you just explain the 2318, those two provisions that were made to that? Can you just explain in a little more detail what those both are?
Sure. So the SB 259 version of it, the formula is in essence all general fund tax receipts in excess of the inflation adjusted base year general fund tax receipts, and any margin there is what would trigger the rate reduction, and the rate reduction would be the rate estimated to account for that amount of receipts. The House version of that is, instead of it being all general fund tax receipts and the less all general fund inflation adjusted tax receipts, it's general fund income and privilege tax receipts less inflation adjusted base year general fund income and privilege tax receipts. So it kind of self-contains the rate reduction provision to income and privilege tax receipts as opposed to making it all SGF tax receipts. That's the first difference. The second difference is that under the House floor version, the rate reduction provision would only take effect if the budget stabilization fund balance is equal to or greater than, I believe it is 20% of the prior year's general fund total tax receipts. Yes, I'm getting a thumbs up from Adam, so that is what it is.
20%. And wasn't there a difference on the buy down on the personal?
Oh, yes, I will add that. The other thing is that the floor of the Senate version, I believe, took all of those rates to 4.5%, and I believe the floor of the House version took them down to 4% as opposed to 4.5%. That's the other difference between the two. I'll update this document for future iterations to capture that as well.
I don't think we have any other questions. Are you?
Yeah, I think we're good too. Do you want to discuss a time to come back and start working?
That would be great, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate it. I know everybody's aware of the schedule and how tight it is, so the quicker the better. I do appreciate that. Senator Corson is available at 12:30 or 1:30, if either of those would work.
Representative Sawyer has post-audit at noon, so, and you probably do too. Do you want to plan on 1:30 if that's?
Let's do 1:30. I think that'd be great.
That works with you, 1:30? Okay. Yes, I think 1:30 would work.
1:30, and thank you very much, and thank Leah for getting this room for us. That makes it so convenient. So,
And just for everybody else's information, we did reserve this room all week long, so anytime tax needs to meet, we'll be down here in this room. whenever that's announced.
So I was just informed that we have caucus at 1:30, but this is absolutely a priority over caucus. So we're just going to have to be flexible for the next 2 days.
Yeah, and we do too.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, guys. Senator Peck has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, this is for staff. On the Budget Stabilization Fund requirement, what is the current year's tax receipts and the Budget Stabilization Fund balance percentage-wise? I'm curious, I think we're there plus, but wanted to find out where we're at.
I believe we are actually currently slightly below 20%. Let me pull that up really quickly here. Just a minute. So the current estimate for FY 2025 SGF tax receipts is 9.65 billion. And I believe, current estimate for FY 2025 Budget Stabilization Fund at the end of the year is 1.794 billion. So that is, I believe, slightly less than 20% of that 9.65.
Okay, well, I appreciate that information because I was fearful we were not even there at this point. Thank you.
Yeah, we're right around 18.6% is our estimate for the current year.
So Eddie, just for clarification, that doesn't include the rainy day fund? We still have the 7.5% in the rainy day fund?
So that is the rainy day.
Oh,
fund.
okay. I
The
thought
Budget
they-
Stabilization Fund is another name, is the statutory name for what is commonly referred to as the rainy day
So
fund.
it's being used interchangeably? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, good to know. Because if we had more money, we were going to take it with tax cuts. I'm kidding. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, if
So I
there's,
think 1:30?
yep, 1:30, if there's no further questions, do we adjourn or recess? I'm not sure, but we'll see you at 1:30. How's that sound?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.